And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. I am PJ Clark, joined by Michael Nania, who was at the Carolina Panthers joint practice this morning. Ben Blessington is out soaking up the sun in Southern California and trying to figure out whether Kamani Vidal is going to make the Los Angeles Chargers at the moment. Michael, how'd it go this morning?
It was a pretty nice morning by Charlotte standards. It's been very hot recently, very rainy recently, so they kind of lucked out in that regard as well. But we had like high 80s this morning. Not too bad. I know that's what everyone wants to hear about is the weather, but that's the first thing that comes to mind when you're going to any NFL event, is for me at least, what is the weather going to be like? And it was okay, so it was bearable. Obviously, I did not have pads and a helmet with a Guardian cap on and all that, but the Jets did, and it seems like the Heat did get to some of their heads. I was not watching the defensive side, but I think most people are. Well, if you're addicted to refreshing Twitter during practices, then you're aware of what happened on the defensive side. We had punches thrown, we had skirmishing. I was mostly watching the offense, so I can't comment with my own perspective on what happened with the Jets defense against the Panthers offense, but I did very closely watch the Jets offense against the Panther defense, and I thought it was very positive, and we'll get into it, but there were a lot of good things to take away from what I saw watching that in person.
I mean, good things are good, especially like we talked about last week, how important it was to go out and take advantage of a Commanders team that was the second worst team in the league last year. You're now practicing against the worst team in the league last year, who I thought they had a pretty nice offseason. They've made a lot of improvements. You're getting a second year of a young quarterback there, but this is a team that the Jets, as currently constructed, should go out there and beat pretty handily. So it's nice to hear good things. Maybe not a good thing. We'll acknowledge it right off the top here. Hassan Reddick has demanded a trade that came out on Monday afternoon. Classic Monday afternoon news dump from Adam Schefter and the like there. Joe Douglas had a statement released by the team pretty quickly, almost immediately, honestly, that the Jets are not interested in entertaining this and are expecting him to join up eventually, and he will not be traded. And I mean, they've been pretty consistent with that this entire time. But your initial reaction to the ensuing trade demand here, and what Joe Douglas had to say about it?
Yeah, it was a little surprising to see that his side has taken it this far. But as you and I were talking about before we started recording this, we didn't want to go too deep into it because
we couldn't not acknowledge it, but
like you had to acknowledge it, but like you called it a nothing burger before we started, and I agree. Like in terms of how this affects the way things have played out and are going to play out, it doesn't really move the needle in terms of the Jets' desperation or where Reddick could end up. No one is trading for him. The Jets aren't going to try to trade for him, and it doesn't make the Jets more desperate to give him what he's demanding. His options are to continue forfeiting game checks until, if he skips the entire season, then he's just back in this situation next year and he's a year older. So he's gained nothing and lost money, or he shows up and plays for the Jets and pushes himself towards earning the contract that not only do the Jets not think he's worth, but clearly the rest of the league doesn't think it either, because if someone did, they would have traded for him when the Eagles were allowing people to talk to him pre-trade. So it doesn't change much. I think I'm a little surprised at his camp and how seemingly unrealistic they're being with their demands. But I think as dramatic as it might seem right now, it still seems likely to me that by the time the Jets come out for that week 1 game against San Francisco, I still think he's going to be there, because it's just hard to see the upside in him not being there. I mean, maybe he pushes it into 1 game. Maybe that's his last resort. But it's just hard for me to see what he gains from what he's doing. So it's, like you said, a nothing burger, I think.
I don't know why he wouldn't want to play for the Jets. Like, you look at what they've been able to do with defensive linemen and the track record that this coaching staff has had in not only developing players, but now this is an elite high level talent that you're bringing into the fold. And you would think playing alongside a Quinnen Williams and getting that interior pressure is obviously going to make your job easier on the edge. He puts up another easy double-digit season here, and you're looking at the payday you want right now. And does he deserve a new contract? I would say so, but I do think the Jets have played this about as correctly as they could have, and we'll load you up with incentives. We'll up the guaranteed money for this year. Everything that they can possibly do short of here's a new deal for $24 million a year, which is a little absurd to just ask for off the top. And now I think this Matthew Judon trade yesterday, very, very similar situation, very, very similar trade package going from the Patriots to Atlanta for a third-round pick. Judon has been practicing with New England while he's been kind of holding in. But it's as similar to the situation you're going to get. And Atlanta does not have a contract agreed to, has no plans to agree to a contract, and Matthew Judon is going to show up and play for the Falcons this year. So at this point, I think the onus is on Hassan Reddick to finally show up and do something.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Jets' mindset behind trading for him. I don't think extending him was ever a part of it. What they realized was that he was not going to sign an extension with the Eagles, and with what he was demanding, which is, as good as he is, the reports of 25 to 28 million or even 24 is a little out of range when you consider his age.
It's
and,
high. It's high.
It's high when you compare it. Like, I put out an article recently, and he's great, but you compare him with pressures, run defense, and especially his age, that being the main thing, really. Because if he is 25 with this resume, it's like, no brainer, sign him to that. But he's going to be 30, and he's a speed rusher who relies a lot on that athleticism to be effective. So clearly, you go back to that trade. He wasn't going to sign with the Eagles. Doesn't seem like anyone else was going to trade for him and make that commitment to what he's looking for. So I think the Jets looked at it and said, here's a guy we can get for, in the trade they gave up for what he produces. That's good value in terms of, a third round pick that probably won't upgrade based on playing time for double digit sacks in their defense would be huge. So I think they saw, here's a guy we can get 1 year contract year motivation.
In a year where you're literally all in, a third round pick for 15 sacks is sure, do that every
right. Like it perfectly complements what they're trying to do. Win now year, let's get this guy in. So I think that was the mindset. And apparently it was agreed upon, but it seems like Reddick reneged on that. So it's hard to figure out what happened between trade and now that caused this to reach the point that it has. But it's also hard to really say where the Jets went wrong in that. They jumped on a good opportunity. It seems like they had his word. Apparently not. And then maybe you could knock them for that. But like you said with Judon, and I brought up the Jamal Adams trade. It's like this happens a lot where teams trade for players in contract disputes and they don't sign them immediately and they have them play out the year. And then they either sign them or they let them walk. But it's not an unusual thing to trade for a player who is looking for a new contract and not sign him. So I think the idea that the Jets are completely in the wrong for that is off the mark because it's something that happens consistently. And it seems like they went off his word. So I think the Jets are doing the right thing right now. And I do think this is going to play out positively. But as you said, he would have a big year in this Jets defense. And he should want to play here if he wants to get the contract that he thinks he's worth. His one big thing, I think his snap count is going to be lower than it has been in recent years. So he'll be fresher. He can just go out there and play full throttle every snap.
That's something that the Jets do, though. Like that's an organizational philosophy at this point.
Right.
That, again, as a 29-year-old, I think he should be in on. I think it's a good thing for him.
Exactly. Right. And that's it's a very appealing situation for what he's trying to do because clearly he has a value for himself that the Jets don't see him at and the rest of the league doesn't see him at currently. But he can get to that if, even at 30 years old this year, he has one more strong season in this Jets scheme where he's going to be rotated, well-rested at his age. He doesn't have to think about dropping into coverage anymore in this scheme. He's got Quinnen Williams next to him. He could not ask for more. He's also got a good offense that's going to put him in, give him leads at the end of the game to clean up in obvious passing situations. He could not ask for a better situation to go out there, feast this season, and go get whatever it is he's looking for next season. But here we are. But I do think it's going to resolve itself despite all of this. So even though we said it was a nothing burger, here we are. We did
go 10 minutes,
decently deep into 10 minutes at this point. But I guess that's less than some other people might have done. I don't know.
Well, this
Maybe
was
relatively
like
short.
ridiculous national news on Monday, and it's like, who
Yeah.
cares? Like, the guy hasn't shown up, and I think the Judon thing, I didn't see like it really get a lot of play yesterday. Maybe I could have missed it in terms of the Reddick situation, but like to me, that I figured it was going to light this whole thing on fire again, being like, oh my God, here is an identical situation that is playing out completely differently for Atlanta than it's currently playing out for the Jets. And just like everybody's just going to lol Jets and dunk on the Jets when I just don't think this is the Jets' fault. And believe me, if it was the Jets' fault, I would be the first one to say it.
Oh yeah.
But I just don't think this is on Douglas or Saleh or the organization at all. It is.
And we should put that out there because I feel like you and I would both be willing to criticize them if it were on them. I mean, I was pretty vocally anti Saleh after last season, and then going into last year, very vocally against Douglas for his complete lack of offensive line.
I think the Huff. I want Bryce Huff. I would rather have Bryce Huff than this entire situation, and I would have said that in March, I agree too.
That's something you could say.
There's nothing that can change that now. Since the trade, I think the Jets have done this completely well. But if you want to go relitigate the trade, that was stupid. And I will continue to criticize them for that, especially because it's ended up in this situation, which, again, we couldn't have predicted and is not truly their fault. But there was a sequence of events that led us here. But I don't. This is bigger news than I think it should be. And I hope Matthew Judon gets his new contract, and I hope Hassan Reddick shows up at some point. Like, that's all you can hope for, really, in the Jets situation right now.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I agree. I was all aboard on bringing Huff back. You could have kept your draft pick, have a younger guy who has maybe a second contract in him after this one is over versus Reddick 1 year. So I agree. Like, if you want to criticize something, you can go back to that, but I feel like everything post allowing Huff to leave, the decision to make this trade, and then how they've handled it post trade, I just think isolating that, it's hard for me to find that much to criticize the Jets about. So the Jets have plenty of moments that are worth calling them out for, clowning them.
I'm sure it's going to happen plenty of times this year, even in a year where they're going to be a good team. Like, there's plenty of things to yell about, I'm quite sure. This is not one of them to me, but I'm glad everybody out there is just getting the Loud Jets jokes off. Make them now.
There were not a lot of opportunities, so I mean, they're just chomping at the bit to finally have one, and here it was. But there was not a lot to yell about on Saturday. That was for sure. And especially after rewatching it.
Good segue.
I think. Yeah, I was looking for the segue there, and you kind of put it out there. But yeah, Saturday was.
Yeah, how did we end up at 13 minutes on Hassan Reddick? I have no idea. We just wanted to acknowledge that it happened.
Yeah, we'll just acknowledge that it happened. I kind of was diving into it. Maybe that one's on me, but I figured we would touch on it and just.
It's good. It's good to talk about.
But our tone was good. Despite the time we spent on it, I think we had the right tone in discussing it. I feel like it's a very, controversial, heated topic for a lot of people, but we're like, hey, I don't think this is Jets' fault. This should play out fine in the end. So
speaking of controversial, heated topics, the debate between Andrew Peasley and Adrian Martinez is coming to a head after Adrian Martinez was PFF's highest graded New York Jet on offense in last weekend's big win over the Washington Commanders. So the QB3 battle is on. As you went through and looked through snap counts and the film, you did a great Olu Tyron Smith video on Twitter. You were writing articles on Fallout, and Xavier Newman looked good. Going back through that game, what stood out to you other than Tyron Smith baiting Hassan Reddick into showing his hands early, and maybe we get to see Hassan Reddick do that for the Jets. Who knows at this point?
Yeah, hopefully. But I do think both of those quarterbacks looked really solid when they were out there. I think Martinez kind of gave you more of the wow throws with the mobility and throws on the move, which was good to see because I think a lot of preseason quarterbacks, like we saw with Chris Streveler, can come in and scramble around against these vanilla defenses, but they don't always have the arm to go with it. And Adrian Martinez showed that. And then also and we'll get to today's practice a little bit more, but he had another big hookup with Brandon Smith in this joint practice. So they have a little bit of a rapport going, which is good for a competing quarterback to find your guy that you can count on that's on a similar level of the depth chart. I think that's a key thing. But Peasley too, I thought he was efficient moving the offense. So I do like both of those quarterbacks, and it's good with Jordan Travis, being up in the air in terms of when he's going to be available. And even if he were as a third quarterback, I think you'd prefer to develop him this year. So to have these two guys showing you solid play, like I'm not going to blow it up too much, but solid play is encouraging. I mean, usually when you get to your third quarterback, you could probably mail it in at that point anyway. But, with this roster that the Jets have, who knows if you get down to your third quarterback, what you could still do. So it would be nice to see something that you could at least have a semblance of hope in.
I mean, it is what it is, right? Like we said it a couple weeks ago when we were doing it with Ben. Like it's like the Tom Moore quote: "If Peyton goes down, we don't practice that." And at least you have Tyrod this year, which will get you something. But if Tyrod goes down, I don't care. I don't care. Like it is what it is at that point. You're better off.
I don't know. Adrian Martinez, highest graded Jet at PFF in this game. I don't know.
It could happen. Let's see what he does at Bank of America this weekend. I guess. Was
Brock Purdy the second string going into his rookie year, or was he third that year? I forget. I'm just trying to find a third stringer to cling on to.
Yeah, I mean he was right. It was him, Trey, and Jimmy. They had all three of them.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Sure. If we have Brock Purdy, if Adrian Martinez is Brock Purdy, I watched a lot of preseason Adrian Martinez last year with the Lions. He looked better. I will say he looked better on Saturday than he did at any point last year. So maybe that's the UFL MVP confidence coming through. He had a great spring, unironically. So we'll see. Nobody cares about the QB3 discussion. Let's talk about Olu. You dissected every snap that man took. I thought he looked pretty good. What stuck out to you?
For sure. I thought, especially in pass protection, very clean. I mean, I highlighted the one clip of him kind of taking after a move that Tyron is very successful with, little fake punch move where you kind of fake throwing your outside hand at the rusher to get him to throw his move, but you pull your hand back and he's kind of grasping for air, and it gives you the leverage to throw him off. And that's not something Tyron invented necessarily, but he's definitely very adept with it and uses it frequently, is one of its most successful users. So it seems fair to think that Olu has at least worked on it with him, gotten some pointers. So to see him pull that out, it definitely was an easy way to connect the dots and say, okay, I could already see the impact of being able to learn from this legendary left tackle that Olu's benefiting from. So in pass protection, I thought it was pristine. I mean, it's almost flawless, and granted a very short appearance in the game, but almost flawless. And I think that's what's most important for him this year. Like if he takes some time to develop his run blocking, if he has a couple penalties, that's fine. You can iron those things out over the years as he develops, but you're going to need someone to come in for a few years or a few games this year and be able to competently protect Aaron Rodgers' blindside if Tyron Smith goes down, which is pretty likely based on his track record. So that's promising. Run game, I feel like, was a little more mixed. There were a couple plays where his hands were a little wide, kind of got splashed in the chest, pushed back, but there were also positive flashes too. It wasn't consistent bad. Like there were plays where you could see when his hands are well placed and he frames a guy well, he can really create movement at the second level. There was one play where he had a linebacker about 5 yards off the ball. His athleticism really pops out. The first play of the game, they had him pulling out in space with Allen running behind him. So it seems like there's some trust in his ability to make some of those blocks as well. So yeah, I feel like you saw high upside, but some things to work on in the run game. But pass protection, good start. And Commanders backups, this already isn't one of the best edge groups in the league, looking at the starters, let alone the depth behind that. So not the best competition of all time, but he looked a level above that competition, which is what you want to see in that situation from your first round pick.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the exact point that I think I wanted to hit in that the pass blocking, the run blocking, it is what it is. I think the Jets are going to be, even Olu aside, the other four, if the other four are healthy and Olu is filling in for Tyron Smith, I think the other four can carry the load on run blocking, and you can get away with a weaker spot there. It's the pass blocking to me where you have to keep the 40-year-old upright. Right. That's all it is. Like you can scheme Brees into situations where the run blocking on the left side can take a hit and you can get away with it. But if that becomes a turnstile, and it's not going to be, because I mean, he's the 11th overall pick. He's incredibly talented and he looked great in his first NFL action, preseason or not. But that's what it is, right? It just comes down to the pass blocking for me, because that's the Jets are going to go as far as Rodgers takes them, but Rodgers can only take them anywhere if he is not under pressure and under duress and not putting too much strain on his lower legs, as we learned pretty quickly last year. So I thought it was a really good start for Olu. Like you said, I thought good use of the hands in pass protection. I mean, he's a clean player. There's a lot to still develop there, but this guy was a top 10 effective pick at offensive tackle for a reason, and learning from a Hall of Famer, like you said. We're already seeing dividends from that, but it's only going to make him better. And, if he's starting next year, which I would probably expect is the case, then I think everybody, whoever the quarterback is going to be better for it. Because I really do think as much reps and practice and development under Tyron Smith as he's going to be able to get for however many games that Tyron Smith is going to give this team this year, I think that's really going to help Olu, much like it would help a quarterback or really a lot of other positions that you draft highly in the first round. But this is such a unique circumstance. I feel like when you're drafting a franchise pillar at tackle, those guys tend to play immediately. Maybe they'll play on the right side for a year and then shift over to left. But having such the rare opportunity to learn under a generational Hall of Fame player, I think that is kind of unheard of, and is really going to get Olu off on a great start.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a very rare, for this high in the draft, it's a pretty rare situation for non-quarterbacks to be able to get that true redshirt year. And not a true redshirt year, because in this particular situation, he's going to play. And that was a big argument for me as to why I preferred taking him or another tackle over a Brock Bowers, because in the end, when he's starting 3 to 5 games, his impact is going to be just as big as a tight end could have been. That was my perspective. So he is going to play. It's not a true redshirt year in the sense that DeBrickashaw Ferguson is in front of him. So he'll play, but like you said, it's not often that you get a guy who can sit behind a non-quarterback who can sit behind a true Hall of Fame type player. And also, I think Tyron Smith is a very transferable player for someone to learn from, because he is an amazing physical talent, but like technically it's all there. It's so clean with Tyron Smith when you watch him. It's just picturesque for an offensive lineman. And that's something that, you can learn from, versus like, all superstar tackles have great technique, obviously. But for example, like a Trent Williams, I even saw an interview with Olu saying this recently. While he was still at Penn State, they asked him which tackles does he watch the most. And he did not say Tyron Smith, but he brought up Trent Williams. And he said he mostly watches him just for fun, because the stuff he does.
I was going to say, you can't learn anything from Trent Williams. He's just he runs faster than everybody and bowls.
He's such a specimen.
Over. Yeah,
right. So that's why I think it's so good that you have a guy like Tyron, because like you can take after the way he uses his hands, the way he gets into his sets, versus like say like Trent Williams. Like he's got some things he can teach you, but you can't just go out there and do what he does. And that's the same thing as if, like, I don't know, Calvin Johnson was in front of you as a wide receiver, or Julio Jones. It's like you just can't go do what they do. But I think Olu can take a lot from Tyron. And quick note from him, while I was at the practice today, the O-line prior to the when they first came out, the O-line was practicing right in front of me doing their drills and stuff. And I really got the sense that Olu was a very hardworking guy in practice, because like they're doing their initial drills where they kind of like get out of their stance and they explode into another lineman. They kind of absorb the block, rotating through that. And they're doing that for a while. But then when they were done and the offensive line started like shifting to another part of the field, whether the team was getting together or whatever they were doing, Olu kind of just stayed back on his own in that same spot. And he's just like getting into his kick slide, just doing it over and over again by himself in that corner of the field, and then just ran back and caught up with them a couple minutes later. So like that little thing stood out to me, the fact that he's that dialed in, that he wants to keep honing that in, even if no one's pushing him to do it. So little things like that, that's what I'm looking at when I'm at practice. Like I did put out some tweets today, but
boots on the ground, baby.
I'd rather focus on those, subtle things than like trying to get the 100 like tweet for a big practice play. But Olu, great debut. Liked what I saw from him at practice.
All right, let's keep it on the offensive line. You just mentioned you watched him a bit this morning. 65 looked really good out there, man.
Yes.
Xavier Newman, who we saw a little bit last year, very infamously had to come in and stop the ball last year against the New York Giants as the reserve center. But he really was a mauler in the run game. PFF's highest graded run blocking offensive lineman of preseason week 1. You did a great write-up of him on Jets X Factor. Xavier Newman, I mean, you saw great run blocking, but expand on that a little bit. What did you like?
Yeah, I really think the athleticism stood out. And I know the Jets are transitioning into being more of a gap blocking team, which I wrote about as well. And you can see that in the preseason game. That's another thing that stood out is you saw more pullers. You saw more things like that, inside running. They even had you don't see this from Nathaniel Hackett, but some creativity in the run game where they did a couple toss plays to the inside where – it's just an inside.
He's got his guy back. It might be a whole new Nate Hackett.
I know Rodgers is there. Just the brain is, it's working now. So you saw some wrinkles like that. Hopefully, I would like to see more of that. But yeah, despite the fact that the Jets are kind of becoming more of a power team, it doesn't mean zone goes away. It's just a more balanced kind of split between the two versus being a little more zone heavy in recent years. But on those zone plays, I thought is where Newman stood out the most. Just he's very explosive, getting off the ball, and just any lateral block. He was really moving his guy far down the line and creating easy reads for the running back to bend behind him. There were a couple runs, like especially Allen had a few runs where zone play, he's reading out in front, but Newman's creating all this movement, and it was easy to bend it back behind him inside for a successful run. So I think that's what stood out the most. He looked pretty athletic out there. So we'll see if he keeps that up. Like you never, as with anything, and this applies to everything we're talking about. One preseason game, you don't want to
the biggest grain of salt. Yeah,
the most giant grain of salt that you can find. But he was impressive, legitimately, in this game.
I liked. I mean, like he was out there moving, like he was moving to his left and getting outside and getting to the second level. He took out a couple linebackers and then had that big block where he just completely finished the play that went somewhat viral on Twitter as big of a backup guard block from preseason week 1 could go on Twitter. But that's what you like to see from a guy who struggled last year. I don't think anybody would characterize it as anything else. Obviously, the Jets as a whole struggled last year, and you never expected Xavier Newman to be playing significant snaps for the Jets last year, I would say. So I think this is a good sense of development early here, and Max Mitchell again. I thought only played a little bit, but that's another guy that we were talking about in the previous couple episodes with the little inside-out flex. But you start shoring up that interior offensive line, the reserves there. Xavier Newman is probably at the top of that list, and you're going to have to. It's another spot where injuries. Well, Elijah Vera Tucker for sure. almost feel inevitable, and you're going to need a reserve there at some point. And I thought it was really encouraging what Newman showed on Saturday. So we'll see how he carries that into Carolina. Anything else you want to hit before we pivot to observations from this morning's joint practice?
Yeah, I guess a couple other things just briefly. I mean, to back up what we thought at first, Jarek Bernard Converse definitely looked as good to me on
Stud.
the rewatch as he did at first. Just total stud for sure. Great coverage on the first deep bomb, but unfortunately a perfect throw. But then after that, incomplete on the next 5 passes thrown his way. He was outstanding. One guy I didn't really shout out after the game, Tack McKinley, and he kind of played later in the game, so it doesn't seem like he's super high in the depth chart right now. But he was very explosive getting off the line, and they gave him 2 pressures and 4 pass rush wins on his only 9 pass rush snaps in this game. So he was very effective when he was out there. I know he's gotten a lot of camp hype, so I do feel like he lived up to it when he was on the field. In addition to that, I just feel like the whole offensive line was pretty solid, which is promising. Just as much depth as you can get, because as we saw last year, you never know when you're going to have to go 3-4 deep into your depth chart, into the practice squad, whatever it may be. So I feel like in addition to Newman, just really the entire offensive line. I mean, there's only 1 sack in the game, and it was a coverage sack, and the pressures were pretty low as well. So Cole Laval was pretty solid. Another UFL standout coming along with Adrian Martinez. Chris Glazer, I thought, pass protected well. And then you mentioned Mitchell, but him and Carter Warren both had good reps. Like, just in general, I thought the offensive line did a decent job. So I would say those are some of the top standout things from Saturday.
I mean, there are worse places to have some depth than the offensive line. Like you said, you never know when you're going to go 3 or 4 deep. And, Max Mitchell has plenty of starting experience, more starting experience than I think we ever would want him to have at this juncture. But he's got it. And that's a guy that you can throw into the fire, and he'll survive. It might not be the prettiest thing, and it might not always look great, but he at least has some reps under his belt. Carter Warren was the guy that kind of jumped off for me watching the game live, and I'm pretty bullish on Carter Warren. I do really like him. That's another young developmental tackle that can now learn under 2 veterans. I'm incredibly juiced up about Morgan Moses being back. I never should have left the first time. I'm fired up to have Morgan Moses back. I can't wait to see him in the regular season. But JBC, I thought was really good, and Tack McKinley. I mean, listen, somebody's gonna have to go win an edge spot, maybe 2. Like, Watts is gonna be in the conversation, but if Reddick isn't showing up, there's at least 1 edge spot on the table there. I'm sure going to talk about Michael Clemens here from this morning in a second, but who knows what's going to happen to Michael Clemens at this point. He could be a starter. He could get cut. He feels like he could go anywhere in between right now. So there are certainly spots along the defensive line to be taken, especially on the edge there. So Tack McKinley, encouraging. Like we've mentioned a couple times, you were out at practice this morning.
Yes.
Michael Clemens also was out at practice this morning throwing haymakers, apparently. So you were watching the offense. So let's start there before we get into the second-hand reporting of Michael Clemens' latest escapade. 8-5 seemed like the connection was ripping it today.
Oh yeah, that was the biggest thing that stood out to me, and also like just being out of practice. Like I've been to a few as both as media and as a fan, and it's just so hard to really capture everything that's happening to me. I mean, you could see the result of the play, but like I always hesitate to say like, man, AVT's footwork at left guard was amazing when you're like at level view with them, and there's 3 people in between you and the left guard. So I always hesitate to do that, and that's why I take it with a grain of salt when even the reporters are doing it, because it's like, I don't know, how'd you guys see that? And you can't watch a replay either. So got to put that out there. But it was not hard to see was, as you said, the connection between 8 and 5. I mean, whether it was the red zone drills, the team drills, or the 2-minute at the end, Rodgers will not hesitate to force the ball to Garrett Wilson in any situation. And I say force, not in a negative way, just in the sense that, like, sometimes you forget there's other players on the team because that connection's happening so frequently. And it's because he can win at any level. I mean, there were multiple deep bombs down the field that they connected on when I was watching. In the 2-minute drill at the end, Garrett Wilson cooked his man on a go route. The DB committed a intentional pass interference to kind of disrupt that, or else it would have been a game-winning touchdown. And then Rodgers went right back to him on the next 2 plays. The first play from the goal line, he tried a slant. A little behind him, it was tight coverage. That was incomplete. But then he went right back to him again in the same spot on a little kind of like a fade, but he threw it low and outside back shoulder because the DB was on top of it. Perfect throw. Garrett Wilson goes down and catches it. So, like, very consistently, he was targeting him. I think any hopes you have of Garrett Wilson going along that Davante Adams trajectory of just how high his target volume is going to be definitely was validated from what I watched today. And Mike Williams isn't out there yet, so I'm curious to see how that affects it. And
that was going to be my follow-up to you.
Right.
Is that, like, he's getting all of this target share and probably will get a ridiculous number in the regular season, but there is going to be a time where you need a second wide receiver at some point, right? And Mike Williams isn't out there, but, somebody has to step up eventually. Like, you had even at peak Rodgers, you had Devontae, sure, but you had Jordy Nelson, you had James Jones, you had all these other guys that you were just Jake Kumaro, infamous.
I mean, the one time he did get over the top and win the Super Bowl, it was not a Davante Adams type build where it was just one receiver and then running back, then a couple like complimentary receivers. The one time he did win, it was when they had their most stacked receiver room with Jordy Nelson, Donald Driver, Jennings. When it was just top to bottom, they had 3-4 guys you had to be afraid of. So, yeah, and the Jets probably don't go that deep with receivers, but they do have Conklin, they do have Breece Hall, and then once Mike Williams is out there, then you do have that as well to complement him. So I'm curious to see how the distribution changes when Mike Williams plays, and we won't see that probably until they go out there against the 49ers.
Yeah.
But for now, it's just the Garrett Wilson show, and other wide receivers just didn't do much from when I was watching. I mean, Gibson had one play where Rodgers extended it. He found like a soft spot, got like 30-yard gain in a team drill. But Lazard was not impressive in this practice. There was a slant near the goal line that was perfectly thrown right off his hands for an interception. And then there was seemingly a miscommunication where Rodgers threw way behind him for almost an interception in the middle of the field. And it looked like a miscommunication because he was kind of yelling at him after the play, and it was way too far behind for it to be inaccurate. So, yeah, other wide receiver, and Corley, I was invisible in this one. He didn't really get the ball when I was watching. So other wide receivers not showing too much, but it didn't really matter because 8-5 was just so consistently reliable throughout this practice. So by far, that was the biggest thing that stood out to me, is how automatic that connection is growing to be.
Great. I mean, that's fantastic, right? You have a top flight quarterback and a top flight wide receiver. Like you said, Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers have won plenty of games, even if they haven't gotten over the hump to the big one. A lot of wins, a lot of games have been won with just those two guys playing pitch and catch back and forth to each other. Then you throw in a great running game and hopefully elite offensive line when healthy, and you're cooking up a recipe for success if those two guys specifically are on the same page to that extent. We've seen what Garrett Wilson can do back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons with the motliest crew of quarterback play ever existing. So we'll see. I'm excited just to see what they can do against San Francisco. Obviously, that's a great team and an unbelievable defense, and he's going to get double-digit targets a game most likely, and it's going to be option A and probably option B on most plays, and we'll see how Mike Williams adds into the fold. I was going to ask you about Lazard, who it seems like he had a couple nice days in the last week or so. The Jets posted a video on Twitter of Rodgers hitting a deep bomb the other day, and Lazard popped up and made a great catch in the back of the end zone. I maybe foolishly am still holding out hope for Alan Lazard. I really think he kind of just quit mentally last year and was kind of depressed, and now he's got his friend back. So we'll see what happens. But tip that interception to Carolina today. Did anything else he did or maybe didn't do stand out to you?
He did have one catch in the flat on that 2-minute drill at the end, and Tyler Conklin got 2 catches on that one as well, and they scored pretty easily before Garrett Wilson had his pass interference and touchdown. So other than that, though, I didn't notice a whole lot from him. I do think, like I said, Brandon Smith had a big catch from Martinez. Lance McCutcheon caught a deep bomb from Tyrod. Tyrod was. I mean, he had a bad interception in the 2-minute drill at the end, but before that, he hit at least 3 20 to 30 plus yard passes to McCutcheon had one, Brownlee, Charles. So there was from the back end of the wide receiver depth chart, there were quite a few big plays, especially from Tyrod, but not too much from Lazard. But like you said, it seems like he has been a little more dialed in this offseason. And I still believe he can have a solid season as your third, hopefully fourth receiver if Corley could step up, give you 400 yards, 3 touchdowns efficiently, because, as your second receiver last year probably was getting a few too many snaps and targets than you would like to be giving to him. But in a smaller role where he just gets, red zone targets, occasional deep ball, some slants where he could use his size, just keep him to what he's good at. I think he can be effective in that. But obviously, you would like to see drops like the one he had today erased. But that's just always been a part of his game. Even before he's with the Jets, he's a pretty high drop receiver. Mm-hmm. So I think you're just going to have to deal with that. And that's one of his deficiencies. But, the less you see of him, the less that will hurt your team. But he was out there pretty much from what I could see, the majority of the snaps where Rodgers was out there. So with Mike Williams out right now, it's a lot of Alan Lazard stepping into that. Also worth noting that Olu worked at right tackle today from what I saw. So obviously Salah said recently that he started practicing there. In team drills today, he was at right tackle. So it's I know we talked about him earlier, but I think it's good to see that they're cross-training him because
totally.
Morgan Moses could go down as well. Being older, he had issues last year with the shoulder. So you would like for, if Moses goes down, it's not a case of, okay, Olu can't play right tackle. Now we got to put Max Mitchell or Carter Warren in the game instead of our first round pick. So I think it's good that they're starting to work them at both.
That's great to hear. Honestly, I mean, it makes sense. And yeah, it's completely kind of relearning all of your motions in an opposite direction. So I can't imagine it's an easy transition, but if you're not expected to play immediately, it helps to have a little bit of versatility there with, as you said, 2 old tackles who maybe can't just be relied upon to get through an entire season. Listen, that's fair. There's a lot of wear and tear on those 2 guys specifically, and the Jets will be happy to have them out there for whatever they're able to give. Another guy I wanted to ask you about, you had a tweet about his kickoff return, Xavier Gipson. Did they work him in on offense at all? Like, was he running with the 2s on offense, or I'm just in my head, I feel like him and Rodgers could get pretty creative on a couple little gadget plays that I hope Hackett has in the book this year at some point.
Yeah, I saw a lot of him with the ones. When it was 11 personnel, it was usually him, Lazard, and Garrett Wilson, obviously. Not a ton of Corley with that unit, a little bit, but it was mostly Gipson. As I said, he had the one play where in a team drill, they were driving the ball. It was an extended play. Rodgers scrambled to his right, and Gipson kind of settled into a soft spot and made a wide open catch. And it was probably like about 30 yards after he got some more yak, set him down near the goal line. So he had that play. I think he had a few short catches in the flat as well. So, yeah, he was involved. yeah, so he made a couple of plays. I could see him getting, and I know he missed a couple of weeks with the injury. Before that, he was gaining some steam, getting reps. Seemed like a much improved player. So the more you could get, the better. I know a lot of people. We all want to see Corley play well. We would love to see a Lazard bounce back, but if more guys are getting involved, playing well, and just pushing each other, then that's a good thing. Especially with Corley, seemingly developing in terms of his all-around game. And if that takes time, it would be nice to have Gibson there as kind of a fallback to fill the same role in terms of more route running based impact. But there were gadget plays as well. And the kick return, it was. Sometimes it's hard to tell what these plays would be if it was a real game. But there was one kick return where he had a couple really good juke moves. He turned it back all the way from the right sideline. Then he ended up on the left. And from what I could see, no one was close to stopping him, and they never blew the whistle, and he was off to the races all by himself down the sideline. So that looked like a likely touchdown, which is nice for him because he missed a game. Corley and Davis were back there to start as the kick returners against Washington, and they both had good returns that reached the 30-yard line. So kind of lost a little bit of steam being out for the week there, but if that play was as good as I thought it looked, then that could be a positive thing for him.
You just mentioned Isaiah Davis. Obviously, training camp practices is not. You can't really glean a lot from the run game. They're not tackling. It's always iffy. Any of the running backs in the pass game, I guess you had a tweet that Rodgers found Isaiah Davis at one point and in a receiving situation, but. Any of the three, all of the three, Braylon Allen, I saw pictures of him today just looking absolutely massive compared to everybody else, which we could probably anticipate. But did you see anything from the running back room out there that kind of stood out to you?
Isaiah Davis had a couple good receiving plays, a few good catches in the flat that were not the easiest. Then there was one play where Rodgers extended the play to his right. Seemed like he did a pump fake to draw the defender in, and Isaiah Davis did a good job of adjusting himself up the field. That was a big catch that would have gotten at least 20, 25 yards. Allen, I don't remember seeing too much from him in the receiving game. Breece Hall had, again, it's hard to evaluate the run game, but there was one run play where he was isolated against a DB on the edge, and again, don't know if he would be tackled, but he juked him pretty cleanly, and there was no one to beat after that. That could have been an 80-yard touchdown if it were a real play. He did have a fumble, I believe, near the goal line, so that was a negative. But I'm not too concerned with ball security from him because he's had 2 whole seasons of touching the ball, or a season and a half of touching the ball pretty frequently, and he hasn't had much of a problem with it. So I wouldn't read too much into that. But definitely it was interesting to see the different styles and to see both of these young running backs contributing in different ways offensively.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. We said it kind of coming off the preseason game that I think Isaiah Davis is going to have a role as kind of a receiving back, a little bit of a threat there. And I don't know how much you're going to get from Braylon Allen catching the ball. He made the one nice catch that was negated by a penalty on that first drive in the first preseason game. But that guy is probably just going to be the thumper. And I think that is his role, and everybody should just kind of be content with that. But he does, at Wisconsin at least, had ball security issues. That was a knock on him coming out. So interesting to note that there and be aware of that, as I would assume he probably gets the lion's share of the early reps this weekend against the Panthers, as he did last week. You want to move over to the defense now? I know you weren't out there watching them, but you were at least in the area and can go through and see the tweets. It seemed like Terrace Marshall, Panthers wide receiver, had himself a pretty good day with a couple busted coverages. Brian Costello said that he kind of mossed DJ Reed, and that started a little bit of a scuffle. Michael Clemens was in there throwing punches. Like, it did not seem like the most successful day for the Jets defense based on reports. Little bit, I guess, disheartening to hear against the Carolina offense that really was bad last year. But anything that you might have either heard from osmosis or just the vibe of the defensive field out there at joint practice today?
Yeah, I couldn't see anything that was going on over there, but I could tell they got into a couple skirmishes. Then I saw the videos after. I mean, DJ Reed just made the effort too. There's one clip where you can see him weaving through multiple people, running across the field to chuck the ball at the back of Terrace Marshall because he had previously done the same thing after a touchdown. So it was chippy over there, and it seems like from the reports it wasn't their best day. But I feel like we've seen enough from those corners in that defense to not overreact to one joint practice with the Panthers. But I mean, I was watching 7-on-7s on defense. I did see that earlier in the practice before they moved fields. Chuck Clark had a nice diving interception and 7v7s off Bryce Young. So I saw that. But other than that, I mean, yeah, I didn't see too much of the defense. But I mean, I guess the transition to the preseason game against the Panthers this week, a little easier for us to watch and glean from. What are some of the things you're looking for there, especially bouncing off of what we noticed in last week's game?
Defensively, I think I want to see the corners be as good as they were last week.
Yeah.
Like I haven't seen any reports about whether Carolina is going to play. I mean, Bryce is pretty young, but do you want to risk Bryce Young getting hurt in the preseason game? I have no idea. Like I haven't seen what Carolina's plans are, but JBC, like you said, was an absolute standout last week, and I thought Stiggers was pretty well. His big highlight was a run play and a design blitz, but keep on throwing him out there. I would like to see him get targeted maybe a little bit more by whoever's playing quarterback for the Panthers and give him an opportunity to make a play on the ball and kind of use that length and athleticism that I would assume is probably what the Jets were looking for when they drafted him. So the corners to me is a big one. Leonard Taylor, how can he follow up last week is another big note. I feel like there's opportunities across the defensive line, as I said earlier, and that is a guy who definitely threw his hand up in game one and has throughout training camp based on reports that he's going to have a chance and has been getting worked into these rotations and learning how Saleh is running this defense. You know, the rest of the interior defensive line is pretty old, right? You got a lot of vets in there, Quinnen, Solly Thomas, the guys ahead of him. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of snaps and a lot of opportunity for him on defense. So you know, the offense is what it is. Like we've made jokes about Adrian Martinez and Peasley and trying to figure out like I can't wait to watch Braylon Allen run the ball, especially against maybe not starters, and he can have an opportunity to do some really cool stuff. But the defensive depth, I think, is the number one storyline for me coming into this game. I just want to see how these young guys look because at some point somebody's going to have to step up and grab the brass ring and take one of these roles in case of emergency this year. And I strangely feel better about the offense and provided Aaron Rodgers is out there. I feel safe and it's a nice comfort level versus, you know, Quinnen misses a couple games and who knows what happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think whenever you get into the preseason, the biggest thing after the first game is to see who can sustain that and start to build a consistent run across all three games. So like you said, the DBs, you saw some good stuff from them, especially JBC. So I would love to see him replicate that. I'd love to see Stiggers continue to get plenty of reps and to, you know, he didn't show a lot last week, either positive or negative. It just didn't really come his way that much. Yeah. So I would like to see him continue to build on that. And then, you know, Tack McKinley pushing for a roster spot. Leonard Taylor, who exploded. Who's going to go out there and prove that they didn't just have one good game against the Commanders, but they're going to go out there and have three great games in a row and show you, okay, I'm legit. Either, you know, whether you're talking about JBC in his case or a rookie, either I've improved or I'm someone who's cut out for the NFL and I deserve to be around. So you saw the start of that with a few performances last week, and I think there are lots of opportunities for, like we talked about Xavier Newman before. What if he's an improved player at this point? What if he had an awesome offseason where he put in a lot of work and he's just
he could have just gotten better. Exactly.
Like that's always what you're trying to see is look for the trends and what sustains itself over multiple games, multiple weeks. Because for now, it's just guys had one good game. Every NFL player is capable of that, or they wouldn't be here. But if you can go out and do that 3 games in a row, that's how you show, okay, this is something for real that should be invested in. Whether that is a roster spot or a practice squad, that's to find out on cut down day. But everyone's got an opportunity to build on the success that they had last week, which was a lot of players. And you mentioned Clemens. Obviously, right now the storylines that he got into a fight today, and Sauce was insinuating last week that Robert Saleh had some pretty significant threats / punishments that he laid out to the team in the event that they were throwing punches or practicing. Didn't happen against the Commanders last week, but happens this week apparently. So I'm curious to know what those were or whether it was enforced.
Can you even contain Michael Clemens? Really? Like you can.
That's the thing. Like who's gonna do anything about it when he's out there? I mean, I saw it. Like he is like Tanzel Smart looked small next to him when I was at the practice today, and like Tanzel Smart's a pretty big defensive tackle, and Clemens is just towering over him. He is a domineering presence. But I do have to say, like, I don't know. It's a lot of, and Joe Blewett has been adamant about this, and I'm with him. But a lot of bark for a guy who not a lot of bite last year.
Yeah, he blocked 1 field goal, and now we're
I feel like Clemens a little bit too active with the skirmishing and with the aura that comes with him for a guy who's like, okay, you set the edge decently as a rookie, but I've never seen a pass rushing play, and kind of declined last year. So I don't know. But then did you see Ulbrich I think Ulbrich had a glowing comment about Clemens recently where he was saying
the other day
he thinks
he's gonna be a starter. And it's like, I mean,
like
really?
a 3-down player. Like now Ulbrich talks like that a lot. Whenever it seems like anytime he talks, it's extremely glowing of whoever he's talking about. So maybe that's just Ulbrich being Ulbrich, and that's how he talks about his guys. Hopefully so. But Clemens 3-down player, I don't know about that. We need to see a little more before we can invest in that. But as you said earlier, he's a hard guy to project. This is a guy who, as we just said, his defensive coordinator is talking about 3 downs. But then at the same time, it's like the way he played last year, is that roster spot worthy when you have Tack McKinley doing what he's doing, when you have Eric Watts, a younger guy who seems like he can play that role effectively. Maybe he has more upside. And then Clemens is a guy who, like, 3rd year, but he's going to be 27 this year. He's not a young guy. There's not a lot of upside for him. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up landing in this depth chart.
And we've been on this recording now for 58 minutes. Neither of us have said Will McDonald's name once, which is
that good or bad?
I was going to ask. I don't know if that's good or bad. I have no idea, but I don't think it's
bad because at least in terms of the context of today, like I wasn't watching the defense. So if I watched the defense and I didn't say Will McDonald, probably bad. But we know what he did last week. He had a great spin move. He didn't really. I think he only played 5 pass rush snaps. 2 or 3 of them were screens or quick passes. So he had like 2 real pass rush reps, and one of them was that. Penalty, okay, but amazing move. So good job. I do think his run defense was shaky. He did get pancaked by a tight end once. Had a couple plays where he got moved. So I think there are still questions regarding
I hate to break it to everybody. That's gonna happen to Will McDonald. That's kind of the problem. That's where we're at. Is that it's not. That's not good. The run defense is not going to be a standard. Will McDonald, 3-down player. That would make me concerned. If Jeff Ulbrich got up there and was like, "Yeah, Will's going to be a 3-down player," it's like, oh, I don't know about that. Like,
So
really,
but I mean, between him and Clemens, it's a very platoon type of situation right now. I mean, Clemens can't win a pass rush rep for anything, but McDonald is about as lanky as they come at that edge position right now. And
it's the tools, Michael. It's the tools.
He does have the tools though. And I have faith. I really think he's going to have a big pass rushing year. And if the same way we talked about Olu and pass protection, I think applies to McDonald too. Like if he's going to get after the quarterback and do what Bryce Huff was able to do, I think
if
he can still be happy
only
with
there
it.
was a
But
Pro Bowl 20 sack guy for Will McDonald to learn from, like Olu has Tyron Smith. Like if only the Jets had somebody that could kind of show Will McDonald how to use his hands in the right spot or anything like that as a lighter defensive end. I don't know. I'm just making this up. Like if only the Jets could figure out how to get a guy like that. And, could you imagine? Could you imagine if that were possible?
Would be exciting.
It sure
McKinley.
would.
That's what you're talking about, right?
Hey, first round pick, Tack McKinley.
Yeah.
that. Hey, I still believe. I think that'll just about do it for this episode. Keep it locked to Jets X Factor. We'll be back this weekend with a recap of Jets at Carolina. Any parting shots from you as we head into preseason week 2? And you are riding the high of watching this team in person today.
Yeah, it was cool. Oh, gotta say, seeing those helmets in person for the first time, like
uniform minute. Here we go.
Beautiful. The uniform minute with the Cool Your Jets. It's kind of like anyone who watches Knicks games, they have the MSG 150 at halftime. They just rattle off like all the NBA highlights. This is the Cool Your Jets 150 where we just rattle off the uniform takes. But yeah, helmets.
We're in green. We're in green this weekend. I believe.
Green jersey debut. Yep.
That's
Offense
big.
Green.
That's really
that's
big.
history. That's history. And I'm not going to be there in person to see it at the game because I'm going to be doing another live stream with Blewett on the Jets X Factor YouTube channel. So check that out. The transitions have been elite on this podcast.
Look at us. We're finding our groove. It's still preseason for us, but we'll get there. We're finding our groove now. We got to sustain. JBC's got to sustain. Leonard Taylor's got to sustain. We got to sustain.
Yes.
We got to keep moving forward. But that'll do it. Keep it locked. JetsXFactor.com for all of Michael and Joe and everybody else's great articles over there. We'll see you this weekend with a recap of Jets at Panthers preseason week 2.